but the appraisal came back and they said, we're not lending that much money. So at that point, you can cancel the contract. You might lose a little bit. You have to pay the seller for any costs he's incurred at that point, but you're not on the hook for paying the seller $250,000 for a house that's not even worth half of that.
Hey folks, Cameron Stewart here, eXp Realty out of Rome, New York, serving you right here in the Mohawk Valley, joined by Colin LaReaux again with Goldbass and LaReaux Attorneys at Law in downtown Utica. What's going on, Colin?
Hey Cameron, thanks for having me again.
My pleasure. Folks, today we're talking about real estate contracts and specifically contingencies. Okay, we find some contingencies on our contracts. Here, some of them are common, some of them are not. We're going to try and briefly break it down for you guys so we can get a little bit better understanding. So Colin, tell us about contingencies in real estate contracts.
Sure. So contingencies are ways in which a buyer and a seller can protect themselves in the event something comes up that they weren't aware of at the time they entered the contract. Common ones we'll see are financing contingencies, sale of home contingencies, home inspection contingencies. You can have less common ones. Robert Kiyosaki, I think, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I was listening to a book or a podcast, and he was saying how he used to have a partner contingency, meaning he could enter into the contract, but it was contingent on his partner's approval. Well, who was his approval at the time? It was his dog, right? Yeah. So this way, if something came up, his partner didn't approve, he got out. Now, I wouldn't recommend you ever do something like that, but so contingency is a way in which the parties on the day they enter the contract, they say, this is a great house, I want to buy it, I got the money. But later on, if something comes up, like they don't get the money or the house isn't as great as they thought, the contract can be declared null and void.
Yeah. So we have, one of the common ones is an appraisal contingency or a finance contingency, okay, where we bring the bank in, okay, the lending institution essentially, and they're going to check and make sure that the agreed upon price in the contract is a good deal for them. So can you explain a little bit about how that works, and is that a big hang up normally?
It can be. So, pre-approval versus actual commitment, right? So pre-approval from a bank is them saying, hey, we looked very, very briefly at your finances, and we think you're the type of person we're going to lend money to. Then you find the property, and they do a deep dive, right? They do real due diligence. They underwrite, and they make sure that A, you have the money you said you did. B, you're still employed. C, from the time you first provide us your info, you didn't lose it all on blackjack or buy a brand new boat, right? So their job is to really verify that everything is true and accurate before they actually commit to giving you that loan. And part of that commitment is an appraisal on the home. Especially now, real estate is going crazy. There's a bonanza. People are buying everything. People are buying houses that, in my opinion, might not be worth what they think it is. So let's say you buy a 2-bed, 1-bath ranch in North Utica, and you're willing to pay $250,000 for it. Maybe you think it's worth that much. You believe it in your heart and your gut as a first-time home buyer, and the seller's thinking, hey, absolutely, you want to pay that? I'm gonna sell it. Then the bank comes in and they say, we ran all these numbers, and there's not one other house that's worth even $175,000, and this place doesn't have walls, or it doesn't have a roof, or it's collapsed in. We're not gonna lend you that much money because it's not worth that. So suddenly, even though both parties wanted to go through with it, you don't have the ability to get the financing. And then as the buyer, you're not on the hook, right? So you did everything you could, but the appraisal came back and they said, we're not lending that much money. So at that point, you can cancel the contract. You might lose a little bit. You have to pay the seller for any costs he's incurred at that point, but you're not on the hook for paying the seller $250,000 for a house that's not even worth half of that.
Sounds like some added protection for sure. So one last thing I wanted to ask you, Colin, this is something that I get a lot. Okay, so I'll have a listing. Okay, I'll have some seller clients, and we'll get an offer, and the offer will have a home sale contingency. Okay, the buyer is willing to purchase this house. Okay, but contingent that they can sell their existing house first. And the question that I get a lot is, is this common? How do I have some guarantees? So can you shed some light on that for us as to what you see commonly with that?
Certainly. So you have to look at it from the financing perspective. The bank is saying, hey, John, we'll lend you this money, but we don't want to lend you the money if you have to pay 2 mortgages. If you can't sell your house, you have to pay a mortgage on that one and your new one. Also, you have to come up, John, with closing costs. Your closing costs might be $15,000. Do you have $15,000? And John says, no, but once I sell my house, I will. So then the contract would say something like, I'm going to buy it. I have the financing, but it's contingent on me selling my house, getting rid of that debt, and taking the profit or the money I made, purchasing the new one. It can be frustrating for a seller because the seller's licking their chops saying, I'm ready to go. But now you have to wait not only for your sale, but the buyer to sell his home.
So do you see those closings dragging out a little longer than most closings normally, or they kind of fit within the same mold?
You know, they can be around the same time frame, but yeah, now you're looking at 2 closings that both have to line up, probably 2 different banks, 2 different sellers, 2 different sets of buyers. So it can really compound the issue. But yeah, I mean, it's very common because not a lot of people have closing costs just sitting in their bank, and not a lot of people have the ability to convince a bank that no matter what happens, I can pay 2 mortgages, which again, I think we talked about. That's a pretty, it's a pretty big figure. It may be the biggest purchase anybody's had.
And if there's ever been a hard time convincing a bank that you're good for it, it's probably now in the COVID world. So definitely seeing some interesting things happen in the lending world as well. Colin, tell us a little bit more about the inspection contingency.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a first-time home buyer or a seasoned investor, right, you don't generally know what's under the hood, right? So to speak, to use a car analogy. You might walk into a house and it looks absolutely gorgeous, but you don't really know how old that furnace is. You don't know if it's some what we might call lipstick on a pig, right? They took this house and they hid all of these little defects. So what you think is a beautiful, safe, structurally sound property is actually not. So you get a home inspector, someone who is certified, knows what they're looking for, and can come and go through the house and say, yeah, this house is in great shape, nothing's wrong with it. Or they come in and they say, this roof is 48 years old, I can see some hidden water damage, there's asbestos all over the place, you shouldn't pay that much, you should ask for a credit. So then with that inspection, you can go back to the seller and you can say, I'm not buying it unless you fix these defects. I'm not buying it unless you give me credit, meaning I pay you less so that I can fix these defects. Or I can't do either. And then the seller has the option to say, tough luck, take a walk, or sure, I'll fix them, or I'll give you money. So it's an excellent way to protect all the parties. The seller doesn't have to accept that he'll fix anything. And the buyer then doesn't have to buy a property that he thought was gold and turns out to be a rock painted gold.
Yes. Very, very important. Folks, especially from an agent perspective, I'll tell you, do not skip an inspection. Okay, let's get a certified inspector in there, get someone who you trust. Okay, and there's plenty of great inspectors in this area. Okay, that's a huge way to protect yourself on potentially the biggest purchase of your life, for sure. Colin, thanks so much for joining me. Folks, we hope this provided a little bit more information about potential contingencies that you might see on a real estate contract, what they mean, and how they're going to affect the closing. If you guys have any questions, please, you can reach out to me directly at 315-351-2765. Colin, let them know how to reach out to you as well.
Sure. So phone number 315-724-2248, or email is Colin, COLIN, at goldbasslaw.com. That's GOLDBAS law.com.
Awesome. Folks, thanks so much for your time. Stay tuned for more videos. We're going to be diving into greater detail on the closing aspect in real estate. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day.